Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our wonderful installment of Espresso with Carlo. We've really had such a great interest in this web series since we started, and we're very excited about it. We do look forward to hosting you all back in person. We hope in the near future, but until then, we are together on this new normal and this medium. So welcome. I hope you're all having a great summer. I pray that everyone continues to be healthy and safe, and that we are beginning to enjoy New York again, obviously in a safe and healthy way. Today, there's great interest to hear from the chair of New York City Planning, Marisa Lago. Marisa, I was remembering we hosted you, I think at your first public event back in March or April of 2017 when you were appointed by Mayor de Blasio. I am not going to read Marisa's bio because it would take us for most of the duration of this, but I can say that given the situation and the world we are in today, that Marisa, having you as the chair of city planning makes me feel better. Marisa, as you know, has a long history in government, both on the city, state, and federal level, in private practice, in the private sector, and I think that we are in for a treat today. So Marisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to give some welcoming remarks, and we've got lots of questions in store.
Great, thank you, Carlo. It's such a special pleasure to have this conversation with you because you and I have so much in common. We are both very proud children of Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
We are also so proud of our immigrant heritages. And so speaking of which, I would actually like to suggest that today's edition of Espresso with Carlo, in honor of my background, be called Cafecito con Carlo.
Me gusta mucho.
Thank you, Carlo. I knew you'd be gracious about that. But more seriously, I would like to elaborate on your recent opinion piece about our wonderful city, in which you so eloquently noted that urban density is what gives us the quality of life that we've come to expect. Density is the fuel that keeps New York City vibrant and relevant. For generations, density has contributed to our city's success, giving us this quality of life that we've come to expect. If you look at key governmental services, be it fire, police, sanitation, public transit, libraries, they're made possible by density. Ditto for world-famous cultural institutions and for welcoming green parks. And what might be less well known is that density contributes to our public health. Our former health commissioner, Dr. Mary Bassett, recently had an op-ed piece in which she noted that the average life expectancy of New York City residents is roughly 2.5 years longer than the US average. Nonetheless, density has, or COVID-19 has put density on trial. We read newspaper articles every day about people and jobs fleeing the city. We hear about large companies sitting on the sidelines and the potential for remote work to replace commercial office buildings. Carlo, you and I have been involved in the civic life of our city long enough to have heard this siren song again and again. After the fiscal collapse of the 1970s, after 9/11, after the Great Recession, after Hurricane Sandy, and now during the global pandemic, pundits just love to wax lyrical about the impending death of urban living, frequently based on anecdotal stories. Yes, some people are choosing to leave the city, at least temporarily, but that doesn't mean that the vast majority of us who are consciously choosing to stay won't pick up the pieces and put our city back together. But it's critical that we rebuild our city, our neighborhoods, and our economy in a far more equitable and resilient manner. Because while we haven't seen credible evidence that density is the driver of COVID-19, we do see a connection to overcrowded homes and to a healthcare system that's not equitably serving our most vulnerable communities, many of which are communities of color, communities of immigrants, lower income communities. So in rebuilding our city, we need to put equity as a driving principle. New York City is premised not just on our density, but also on our diversity, a diversity that we embrace and that will fuel our recovery. While this pandemic is a tragedy for our city, and most especially for families who have lost a loved one to COVID-19, as you spelled out so clearly in your op-ed, COVID is not the end of New York City. A newer, different, brighter New York City will emerge.
Thank you, Marisa. Obviously, I appreciate your kind words. You know, a couple of people asked me, what made you want to write that op-ed? And I hope everyone listening and watching us has read it. And it was really written because of my anger. And my anger at so many pundits, and if we weren't in a public setting, I would use a different word, of course, but that are enjoying this writing of the end of New York. New York will never end. New York will only begin. And I think all of us in the building industry, whether it's the construction, the engineers, the developers, the owners, the planners, the people that make up the fabric of this city, we are going to continue to build the New York that we know and build it, as you said, in a better way. Last night, and then we'll jump into questions, but I have to just say, I went out to dinner with a friend of mine last night in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, and we do share our love of Brooklyn, Marisa. And it felt like nothing was going on. People were out, people were walking. I met so many people that I haven't seen in a while who said to me, you know, were it not for COVID, we'd be away in August. We're really enjoying sitting outside in Bay Ridge. It's so beautiful. We're talking to people we don't see that often. It just felt like communities were alive. And New York is a city of communities, of people, of diversity. And, you know, people that are leaving, you know, they will regret leaving because they will miss New York, and the shows will be back, and the hustle and bustle will be back, and we'll do it in a better and safer and more forward-looking way. So I think we're all in this together, and I am very excited that the building industry continues no matter what the crisis has been in New York. It is this industry that somehow pulls us out of it, and it's an exciting time to be here. Obviously, for all of you, we are excited that ULURP will be starting again, September 14th, I believe. You resumed remote meetings. Tell us a little bit how the remote ULURP is working. How will communities continue to be engaged in the process?
We're incredibly fortunate that both the mayor and the governor have issued emergency executive orders that suspended the ULURP time clocks in mid-March, and also that allow the City Planning Commission to hold public meetings, public hearings remotely. As soon as the pause started in March, the Department of City Planning realized that we needed a new way to engage with communities across the city. Frequent and active engagement with community boards, with elected officials, with community organizations, with businesses. It's the lifeblood of the Department of City Planning. So we built in-house, without the need for consultant services, NYC Engage. It's a user-friendly remote portal that allows the Department of City Planning staff and also the City Planning Commission to fully engage with the public from afar. Now, prior to the pandemic, the only way to participate in a CPC public hearing was either to submit written testimony or to trek down to our offices at 120 Broadway in Manhattan, and on a Wednesday in the middle of a workday. Thanks to NYC Engage, seniors and others with mobility challenges can now testify remotely. New York City NYC Engage means that a small business owner, a teacher, a construction worker, a parent who's home with a young child, folks who traditionally might have found it difficult to get to 120 Broadway in the middle of a workday can take a short break and testify from their kitchen table or from their home. So with New York City Engage up and running, we resumed CPC, the City Planning Commission meetings, on August 3rd and announced that September 14th will be the day that the ULURP time clocks will once again start ticking. We very consciously decided on a staggered restart for a number of reasons. First, we wanted to help the city's 59 community boards, which are an integral part of the ULURP process. Community boards typically don't meet in August, and so a staggered start gives the community boards the time that they may need to get comfortable hosting remote public meetings. The staggered start also allowed the City Planning Commission to focus on those applications that were already in the ULURP pipeline and pending before the commission at the time when the time clocks were paused on March 16th. And then finally, there's a very practical reason for the staggered restart. What it has done is it has allowed the Department of City Planning team to work out kinks in how to hold the City Planning Commission meetings online. Although I have to say that the public meetings that we have held so far have gone surprisingly smoothly, and I've been so pleased by the robust public participation. I am very, very much looking to a post-pandemic time when the Planning Commission can meet in person, when we can see members of the public face to face in our hearing room. But I do hope that the state legislature will adopt permanent changes to the open meetings law that will continue to allow remote participation, because I think that NYC Engage is just opening up public participation in these important hearings to a host of folks who traditionally, for practical reasons, were frozen out from participation.
And you know, I think we're all trying to look at the good that's come out of the COVID and the stop. And this is, if we can engage communities in a better and easier way, I think we're in a better place. Last week, the Planning Commission voted to approve the Industry City rezoning and let that move forward. Obviously, as a Brooklyn resident and someone who's spent a lot of time on that project, I was personally very, very happy to see that happen. Tell us why you all thought it was important to move forward on Industry City.
We thought it important because of jobs. As we look at a post-pandemic world, we are focusing on projects through the lens of health equity, racial equity, resiliency, and always with an eye on the city's current financial situation. The Industry City application is a private application. It is not seeking public subsidy. We are prioritizing projects that create jobs in different sectors of the economy and at a range of different wages. Industry City was a private application conceived in a pre-COVID world, but when we looked at it with our new lens, it fit the bill. And I was very pleased to see that there was a solid 11-1 with one abstention vote in support of the proposal, with many commissioners honing in on the job generating facet. As we look at projects going forward, we have to prioritize projects that bring investment to neighborhoods that have been hard hit by COVID. And this means incentivizing affordable housing construction and also bolstering our community-based healthcare facilities, our healthcare systems. We also have to keep up our focus on projects that advance climate resiliency. Even as we redouble our focus on equity, the need to address resiliency hasn't gone away at all. There's absolutely no hard and fast rule about the number of projects that can be reviewed through ULURP in the coming 18 months. There is large projects, large private applications like Industry City. They frequently generate controversy and draw a lot of media attention. But equally important to the city's recovery are smaller bread and butter projects that rarely make headlines, but that are nonetheless important. I would give as an example a project that is pending before the commission now, the expansion of a pediatric wing at Maimonides Medical Center, which serves a Brooklyn community hard hit by COVID-19.
I know it very well.
Right. And other projects like the relocation of a sanitation garage that is currently located adjacent to the City Housing Authority's Queensbridge houses, the largest public housing complex in the nation. The relocation of that facility to a more remote location in a heavy industrial area of Queens, far removed from residences. That's an environmental justice project, if ever there were one. And there are projects like this steady stream of small private applications for rezonings that lead to the construction of a 50-unit apartment building, a 24-unit apartment building in Brooklyn, in Queens. And as part of these rezonings, at least a quarter of the units in each of these newly approved apartment buildings will have to be permanently affordable under the zoning resolution's mandatory inclusionary housing provisions. Again, not headline grabbing, but just a steady stream of these all-important housing projects.
Right. And important rezonings that put people to work, create opportunities in communities, again, that don't always get the notoriety. I mean, you know, you look at the Maimonides project. I live near there. Unfortunately, my family has used Maimonides many times, and they do great work. But they're not, you know, they don't get the headlines. But yet, this is what you need. If you are ill, you need a great place to go to. So I think as you mentioned prioritizing, and as you mentioned, how do we look, you know, this administration still has 16, 17 months left in its tenure. You know, I always remind people that the Empire State Building took 18 months to build. So in this time frame, we can get a lot of things done for New Yorkers. Marisa, tell me a little bit about how you see the restart of ULURP on September 14th and the clock moving, and what can New Yorkers expect from the commission over the next 16 to 18 months?
In many ways, it will be business as usual, because we know that projects are a long time in development. But as Deputy Mayor Vicky Bean pointed out probably around a month ago, we will be looking at projects through the lens of how does this help with the economic recovery? How does this help with an equity agenda? Is this a project that furthers the construction of housing and affordable housing? And so the notion of purely speculative projects, of entitling a project with the hope of flipping it and building way into the future, that is not something that we believe will address the immediate needs of the city. We're going to be looking at projects that create jobs, not just in the traditional central business districts in Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, but also creating jobs near where New Yorkers live. I think that that is an immediate challenge. And so we will continue, again, to process a full array of rezonings, of applications for special permits, for the type of relief that is provided in the zoning resolution, but with this heightened focus. The other thing I want to emphasize is that, again, it's the projects that go through ULURP, and a relatively small subset of them that generate a lot of attention and controversy. But our zoning resolution, unlike that of almost any other major city, is premised on as-of-right development. The overwhelming majority of non-government construction projects occur without ever having to come to the City Planning Commission. And that is good news for New York City. It's what has allowed the city to develop so vibrantly and without the overlay of a site plan approval, which is what so many other cities require on a project by project basis. And I would argue that it is fantastic. It is a fantastic system for the members of the Building Congress because it facilitates construction.
Absolutely. And I think we'd all agree right now, we want to really create the jobs of the future. And this allows that to happen. But speaking of development, given COVID, given the state of the economy right now, what do you see as some challenges to development in New York in the next year or 2 years?
I'll focus on the challenges that the Department of City Planning is facing. There are broader questions that could be better addressed, let's say, by, I know one of your prior guests was James Patchett, the head of the city's Economic Development Corporation. What we're doing at the department is looking at outdated provisions of the zoning resolution that we need to get out of the way of job creation. In the short term, we're doing this by using the mayor's emergency executive order. One example, historically, the Department of City Planning has been very proprietary in protecting POPs. These are the beloved privately owned public spaces that provide these delightful little green interludes in some of the city's densest neighborhoods. The POPs are created in return for a density increase, a bonus for the landowner. But we recognized that these beloved POPs can and should be doing double or even triple duty. So we asked the mayor to override the provisions of the zoning resolution to allow POPs to be used for outdoor seating for nearby restaurants, realizing that this was a way to help jumpstart a sector of the economy that has been so hard hit. We also recognized that city bike usage has surged during the pandemic, which is a most welcome development. And so the mayor's emergency executive order also allows city bike docking stations to be placed in appropriate POPs. Longer term, we're very focused on provisions of the zoning resolution that just don't comport with today's reality. As your members may know, many sections of the zoning resolution were adopted in 1961. In 1961, the vision was for a very heavily automobile-centered, low-density urban sprawl type of development. High on our list is a rethinking of parking requirements, especially for commercial districts that are well served by public transportation.
So critical. We get calls in our office so often, and as you know, I worked in Brooklyn for many years and saw that resurgence of the downtown Brooklyn and other places. And you have some of these parking lots that are never more than 20–30% full. And so I'm glad to hear that. You mentioned the streets. I think, people are loving with the nice weather, being able to sit outside. And I know over the years, it's sometimes been challenging, to say the least, for restaurants to get street permits and to put seating outside and to use, I will not mention the restaurant, but friends of mine in Manhattan have a restaurant and they have one of these open plazas near them. And they always wondered, well, why aren't we using it? And, so tell us a little bit about the Planning Commission's vision for the future of outdoor dining and enjoying New York City at its finest.
The department is so bullish on open restaurants. We worked hand in glove with the Department of Transportation and also with Consumer Affairs. And our contribution came in understanding the public realm, understanding the competition that is there for the public realm. We demand a lot of our sidewalks. We demand a lot of our streets. I do think even a crisis as horrible as the pandemic can have a silver lining. And one of them is what you mentioned. It has sparked an important and an ongoing public debate about the best use of our public realm. We're reimagining our streets through the Open Streets program, through the dedicated bus lanes. I was thrilled to see 14th Street, a pilot program, expanded in geography, river to river, and made permanent. It is a fundamental rethinking of this spine, one of the spines of the city. I think that for too long, we haven't questioned the wisdom of turning over so much of our curbside space to car storage, to parking. And what I'm hoping is that with open restaurants, with the scene that you described in Bay Ridge of people enjoying using the curbside lane as a community gathering space, as a place to get a meal, as a place to support our small businesses, I am hoping that there will be a growing advocacy community for turning over much more of this important part of our public realm to people and not just reverting to its use almost exclusively for cars.
Right, and you know, I'm just looking at some of the people on the webinar today, and a lot of our contractors and developers and owners are really creative individuals who would love the opportunity to say, I'm putting up a new building in Queens or Brooklyn or Manhattan or wherever it is, and let's be creative on how we're going to use the outdoor space and how we're going to incorporate community. So I think these are really exciting things. You know, look, you walk along Broadway in Midtown, it's wonderful to see people sitting outside. Once the theaters come back, it's going to be great to see people. And look, we are creative folks in New York. We'll figure out how to sit outside in November and December and February. We'll make it work. So I think I think we're excited that your vision includes really a relook at the Open Streets program. And I think that's a wonderful thing for the city.
If I could pick up on your mention of the
Please.
theater, at one of the meetings that we have already had, the department presented to the commission a proposal for a theater special permit that grants additional density, additional development rights in return for the theater undergoing a significant rehabilitation. And we were just so pleased that even in the teeth of the pandemic, which has shuttered Broadway, that a theater owner was still there, banking on the future, looking to get this special permit. And the commission was just so pleased to see this. It's that sign of the indomitable New York City spirit.
Absolutely. You know, we talked earlier, and you were kind enough to mention my op-ed, but there are some New Yorkers that are saying we need to leave. And, you know, I think if the New York Times and the Post has another story about moving trucks, I think many of us are going to be ready to just scream. But how do we keep New Yorkers in New York? You know, you're a New Yorker at heart. I still say you're a Brooklynite at heart, of course, but
I love all the boroughs.
Exactly. We love all boroughs equally. How do we keep New Yorkers here? What do we need to do moving forward?
Look, as we've mentioned, you and I and the overwhelming majority of New Yorkers who have remained, we're bullish on the city. It's our home. We know it'll bounce back. Now, it's going to take time, and the city will be different in some ways. If we think back to 9/11, which leaves us scarred to this day, the city bounced back, but it looked different, right? There was a new focus on physical security. We today just take for granted that you no longer enter an office building without going through a security screen. But the city adapts. If we think back to those horrific early days after 9/11, when buildings were just putting up concrete barriers on their sidewalks to protect themselves, from an urban design point of view, that was horrible. What have we seen? Over the years, we have seen those concrete barriers become planters, become sculptural works of art. So I use that as an example of how the city will change. Um, I don't know which of the changes will remain with us. Perhaps there will be, for a number of years, more concerns about crowding in public spaces, although that may well be countered by those of us who just can't wait to give a friend a hug again.
I'm ready.
To competing. But at its core, New York City is about New Yorkers, those of us who are fortunate enough to have been born here, but also those who have adopted us. Unlike, let's say, a Switzerland, where it is almost impossible to become a citizen, in New York, if you've been here for 10 days and you love us, if you have like the vibrancy, the diversity, the creativity, the fact that we're a city of both dreamers and doers, then we're proud to call you a New Yorker. I do think that looking at New York City's population, I should back up and note that the Department of City Planning is very fortunate in having a world-class population division. We have amazing demographers working on the team, because you can't plan for a city if you don't understand the people. New York City, for decades, has lost more people to domestic outmigration than we receive from domestic in-migration. But the city has continued to grow because of immigrants. The fact that we, throughout our history, have been a city of immigrants, and the fact that immigrants have a higher fertility rate. And so as a result of federal immigration policy, we actually have seen since 2018 a leveling off of the growth. And so I do think part of the key of bringing back the New York that we know and love is, again, being able at the federal level to send out welcoming open arms to immigrants who want to join our city.
Look, two things pop up in my mind. First of all, my parents are immigrants. They came here in 1967, and I'm proud to say that I was born in New York. I've lived here my whole life, but it's interesting if you watch, and you and I are both students of history, of course. If you watch one of Ronald Reagan's closing speeches before he left the presidency, and it's interesting to think that, 40 years ago, we were hearing this from a president. He told a story similar, Marisa, to what you said, is that if you are in Switzerland or Germany or France, you're never really French, you're never really German, you're never really Swiss. But in America, it doesn't matter where you come from, because immediately you're American. And I would amplify what you said about New York. Once you are in New York, you are a New Yorker. I don't care if you've been here, your families come 300 years ago, or like my parents, post-60s, or new immigrants. We are all American. And when you look at the building industry, and you look at who is building New York, it is really, it's phenomenal to see the diversity, the excitement of new immigrants, children of immigrants who are now the CEOs of, and I'm not going to call out some of my board members who are on here, but whose parents or grandparents were immigrants. And now they are amongst the leading CEOs in New York who have helped transform the city into this great place it is. So, but with that, we do have some challenges. And I think we learned not just that COVID was a challenge in the last 6 months, but the movement for racial justice has really brought to the surface issues that we've known about, but now we're hearing about more. It's interesting to look at how the building industry is doing to do a better job and to really advocate for changes. But give us your perspective on how the city and the building industry work together for a better equitable planning, better development for the communities, particularly outside of Midtown and downtown Brooklyn, et cetera.
You know, COVID, as you noted, it's a wake-up reminder that we have to redouble our efforts. The fact that we are even having the conversation about structural racism is a start, not nearly enough, but thank goodness we're having the conversations. Most of the members of your organization live or work in New York's various communities, and the fact that you're listening in today already suggests that you're civically active, and that's great. That's important. It's not just those who are in government who are part of the civic fabric of the city. You had mentioned Industry City. It's the largest job-generating land use proposal that's currently in ULURP, but I bring it up in the context of the question, Carlo, to speak about the ethical imperative, but also the economic imperative of addressing the inequity in our city and the very real fears of gentrification. We feel them, we hear them, we see them every day. And we know that without both public and private investment, we're not going to be able to generate the jobs that our communities need, the jobs that provide the paychecks that allow people to afford the rents in the city. But along with these jobs, we also need complementary job development and training programs. We need tenant protection programs. These aren't programs that can or should be created through zoning. The solution lies far beyond even the broad remit of the Department of City Planning. But while city government does a tremendous amount of this work through a host of other city agencies, we continue to need the private sector's creativity, your ingenuity, and yes, your financial support as well. We need to work together to reach a more equitable city, and that requires government. It requires the not-for-profit sector, which is already playing a very large role in addressing some of the immediate impacts of the pandemic, but also the private sector. I actually, again, am old enough to be able to look back on the creation of the New York City Housing Partnership, which grew out of the economic crises of the 1970s and created thousands of affordable homes. We don't yet know what the equivalent private sector organization that grows out of this pandemic will look like, but I'm optimistic that the private sector will step up again in a form that's appropriate for today's challenges, and will work in tandem with those of us in the public sector and with our communities, and in particular, our communities of color, our immigrant communities, our low-income communities, to produce an even more vibrant and much, much more equitable New York. It will benefit every one of us, residents, businesses alike.
I agree, and it will continue to add to the reason why people want to come to New York and want to stay in New York, and I think that's our goal. I want to go back to an earlier part of our discussion, which was as you reopen ULURP and restart ULURP. And one of the questions from one of our listeners is, in addition to environmental justice and other priority projects, will projects with resiliency objectives, climate mitigation features be encouraged to move forward to ULURP?
Absolutely. I'll give a couple of examples. One is Industry City. It was very hard hit during Sandy, and the plans call for a retrofitting for ending up with a far more resilient campus. That's a private application. At the Department of City Planning, we have been working for the last number of years on zoning for coastal resiliency. This is a citywide text amendment. And as anyone who has been through a ULURP that involves one or maybe two community boards, you can imagine the challenge of a zoning change that affects every community board. And it is a series of proposals that will make it easier for homeowners, for businesses, for larger building owners to be able to move their buildings in a more resilient direction. To me, one never bets against Mother Nature, and we've seen that with the pandemic, but we've seen it equally with issues of resiliency. The pandemic is front of mind today, but I'm confident that as we look out a number of years, the pandemic will be behind us, but we will still be facing the absolute imperative of becoming a more resilient city.
I agree. As you start looking at the ULURP process, and really as you look at the next year to year and a half of the administration, where does a large ULURP that has an impact, not on a one developer or one project, but more of a citywide, something that has a citywide effect or a neighborhood effect, are those rezonings still going to happen? And by that I mean, and I don't want to use examples, but rezoning of a community, rezoning of, you know, certain neighborhoods. Where does that fit in the pecking order moving forward?
We have to look at what's in our pipeline, and we have the Gowanus rezoning in our pipeline with the environmental work almost done on that. With respect to starting from scratch with a neighborhood rezoning, don't see that happening. Just it's the amount of time that we put into engaging with community groups, with community boards, with elected officials, with neighborhood activists. That is a lengthy process, but we should emphasize the importance that good planning work continues across administrations. We look at an example like Greater East Midtown. There was an attempt to rezone East Midtown at the end of the Bloomberg administration, didn't go through. Learning the lessons, going back and retooling the proposal, hearing the concerns of the community, we were able in the de Blasio administration to pass a very significant job-generating rezoning. Similarly, work that began at the department in prior administrations on East New York culminated in a rezoning of East New York that is already changing the community. The amount of new housing construction that's underway, a school under construction, you won't recognize the portions of Atlantic Avenue in East New York because
amazing. I drove by there recently. It's incredible.
City Line Park receiving its first renovation. And so much of the work that the department is doing today will bear fruit in the future. And planning and rezoning is a long-term game. It is looking at the city as it is today and its needs, but also anticipating the needs in the future. And so I think an important message is that planning will continue. A new administration will determine what of the planning work to prioritize. But I frequently advise the amazing career staff at the Department of City Planning that their work transcends administrations.
I agree. I think, you know, you bring up how East Midtown didn't happen at the end of the Bloomberg administration and then was picked up. And I think we all agree that the East Midtown rezoning is incredible, and what your team did there and the leadership at city planning. I mean, you look at One Vanderbilt and you realize that, to me, and we have a lot of great buildings being built in New York, but One Vanderbilt really is an example of a partnership that a successful rezoning can bring about. And to watch it and to walk by there and to see what SL Green is doing with transit and the neighboring plazas. It's amazing, and we want to see more of that, I think.
One Vanderbilt translated into $200 million in subway improvements.
It's amazing.
And as much as people can thrill today to see a beautiful building, to see the plazas, when it opens and people see what's going on inside and underground. I had the good fortune to take a tour with Jano Lieber of the MTA of the underground spaces, and it will be transformational for Grand Central.
It's amazing. And we want to see, I think, more of those partnerships. And by the way, when that is all open next year, more and more New Yorkers are going to say, why would we want to leave this city? And by the way, we want to come back to work in Manhattan because we miss seeing people and being with people.
Could I actually, we've been talking about office, sort of Midtown Manhattan, but give another example of what is underway. And maybe I'm showing a Brooklyn bias because I would love to.
Okay, you're allowed to with me.
Okay, then let's go back to Brooklyn's working waterfront. From the Brooklyn Navy Yard to the north, all the way down to the Brooklyn Army Terminal, the city has spent millions to upgrade spaces for a wide variety of jobs in today's economy, to improve our freight rail network, and to create new waterfront open spaces, and to the questioner's point, to create a more resilient waterfront. I have to give a huge shout out to New York City's Economic Development Corporation. They invested in the Made in New York campus, which is keeping garment manufacturing in the city. EDC is also working with New York State to bring a wind power assembly hub to the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal. These city investments are leveraging private investments. We've mentioned Industry City, but another is the announcement earlier this month that Steiner Studios, which currently has its hub in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, is building a second facility at the publicly owned Bush Terminal. 1,600 construction jobs, 2,200 permanent jobs. So these are just other examples of wise government investment that is then capitalized on, augmented markedly with huge multiples by the private sector.
I agree. You know, you just mentioned the 3 or 4 incredible projects. And when you think about the rumor out there of the demise of New York, and then you see that people are investing, Steiner Studios can be anywhere, right? They are doing amazing work. I've known them forever. But they decided they want to invest in Sunset Park. Why? Because it's New York, it's Brooklyn, it's the boroughs, it's the place where the creative talent is.
I would say it's the workforce also.
Absolutely. And I think we have a few minutes left, but we should take a minute to talk about the workforce of New York. I think New York will always be the place where a talented person, no matter where they are from, what they look like, what their age is, will still want to come to the Big Apple to pursue their career. And while there are other great cities, and I will always say there are beautiful cities across the country and the world, there is nowhere for a talented person to explode in their career like New York. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
When people think of New York, they think of our skyline, they think of our institutions, but what is New York but our people? The scene that you described in Bay Ridge is, to me, emblematic of New York. People watching, the people who look nothing like us, and we're attracted to find out more. It is a curiosity. It is, for so many of us, a choice, a life-affirming choice. So when I look at these city initiatives, again, I very much focus on the role of the city, but also the role of the private sector in connecting New Yorkers to the jobs that are available. When we think of a Steiner Studios, we think of the stars who are there, these highly compensated employees. But look at the reality of the carpenters who are building the sets, of the makeup artists. Look at the need to the folks who are working there to get lunch each day, and their patronage of local businesses. It is part of a virtuous infrastructure. But again, our challenge is making sure that we focus on job training that can connect people to good jobs.
Absolutely, and I think that is so critical. 5 minutes left. I do want to just go back to, because you did mention the Gowanus rezoning. Can you tell us where that is in the world?
Yeah, certainly. We have done a ton of work on that. We have gotten so much useful input from the community that has been extremely engaged, and have worked tremendously closely with the two council members who are involved, whose districts are within the proposed rezoning area, Councilmember Brad Lander and Councilmember Steve Levin. We are finalizing the environmental review so that we could then certify the project. That's the technical term for beginning the 7-month, very formal ULURP process that would start with a presentation to the Planning Commission. It would then go to the affected community boards, from there to the borough president, back to the City Planning Commission for a public hearing and a vote, and then ultimately to the City Council.
And is it the hope that this will be done before the clock ticks on this administration?
I would hope so.
Great, that's good news. I know a lot of people have put a lot of time and energy, including your team, but also the community in the Gowanus. So that's exciting.
There is so much potential there for creation of housing, and a significant amount of affordable housing, for job generation, for improvements to the public realm, for enhancements to transit. It can be a win all around.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, for our members, it's exciting because as we, one of the things I'm hearing talking to members over the last few months is they're not worried about today, because they feel like they have enough work right now to get them through it. But they're a little worried about 21, 22, and 23. Are we planning for new things that they can work on? And, when you talk about what Gowanus rezoning, for example, will be, or what Industry City or other things across the city, the pipeline for work in 2 or 3 years really is exciting for our membership and for New Yorkers in general.
Carlo, could I take a moment to address what is very much the issue of the day, an existential issue for a city as diverse as New York, and that's the census. Right. And just urging your members to fill out the census form. Without a good census count, we don't know who we're planning for. We don't know where seniors may be living, and that's important so that we can provide for their needs. We need to know where families with young children are so that we can make sure that we have the school capacity available for them. And just to ask your members, in whatever social circles you travel in, whether it is a house of worship, whether it is a sports league, just emphasizing the critical nature of filling out the census. It's important as a business imperative, because good census data is relied on by businesses to understand and thus better serve their customers. Right now, the data that we have is a decade old. I'm sure your constituents, the folks participating, understand that the federal funding that we receive, the representation that we get, not just in the US Congress, but also in Albany, depends upon filling out the census form. It only takes a minute. It is entirely anonymous, and the anonymity is protected by law. Currently, our citywide census response rate is a little bit above 56%. That compares to 64% nationwide. And sadly, in too many of our neighborhoods, we're not even at 50%. This is leaving money on the table. It's leaving political voice to other parts of the country. To end my census message on an optimistic note, I have to give a shout out to both Washington Heights and Upper Manhattan and to Co-op City in the Bronx. They are leading the city in self-response rates. Washington Heights, 67%.
Wow.
And Co-op City, 69%. So we need to be more like Co-op City and Washington Heights everywhere.
We do. And look, I think the most important thing of everything you've said, and they're all critical points, is the federal funding and the political representation that we will not get or lose, because we will lose 1 or 2 congressional seats if we don't fill out these forms. And look, for our members who want to build MTA projects and Port Authority projects and things across the region, we need federal money. And we are, I was in Washington, D.C. last week for a few days, even in this pandemic, meeting with people to talk about federal funding for the MTA. Look, what Pat Foy and Jano Lieber are doing at the MTA is incredible. What Rick Cotton and his team are doing at Port Authority, what you're doing, what your sister agencies are doing, DDC and SCA and DOT, and I can go on. There's just so much that we need to do in New York. The bottom line is we need to fill out our census forms. So I think it's 12 o'clock. It's a beautiful day. I hope everybody watching will go out and have lunch in a local restaurant. Enjoy, spend your money in New York. And Marisa, I have to tell you, it is truly always a pleasure to speak with you, both at events like this, but in our one-on-one conversations. Your heart is in New York. You are doing incredible things, and I'm comfortable and I feel secure that you're going to be at the helm of this agency to get us through the next 16 to 18 months. So thank you from our entire industry for all that you do and for your great leadership.
Thanks so much. The pleasure was mine, Carlo.
Thank you. And everybody have a great day. We are going to take a week off from Espresso because we do realize people may go on vacation next week, but stay tuned. We will see you hopefully right after Labor Day for an exciting fall season ahead, and also some in-person things as well. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you.